Well, hello and welcome to the podcast show for the Committee to Elect Hall for Sheriff, our inaugural, I guess you could say, podcast show. Tonight, we're going to be specifically talking about school, workplace violence. And tonight, I'm very happy to have with me Heath Tester, former commander, Lorain County SWAT team, longtime law enforcement professional in Northeast Ohio and Lorain County. And Heath, welcome to the show.
Welcome.
All right. Well, you've had a lot of experience with tonight's topic and dealing with preparing for and trying to prevent any type of workplace violence situation. But that was several years ago, and we haven't decreased in the amount of shootings that we've had in malls, schools, office places, or anything else like that. And but before we get into that topic, Heath, just tell us a little bit about when you started your career and how did you actually get involved with Lorain County SWAT?
I started in 1994, came to the sheriff's office in 1996, and in 2001, I went on the SWAT team and worked my way up through the ranks there. And in 2014, I was the tactical commander for the team and came off the team at the end of 2020.
All right. So about 13 years from joining the SWAT team to running the SWAT team.
Yes.
So that had to be experienced, a lot of training and everything else that had happened.
Yeah. And the thing is too, Columbine was in 1999. Mm-hmm. So shortly after that, law enforcement, SWAT, everybody had to start redoing their tactics on how we're going to deal with it. So it was really good for me to come in at that ground level. We started the rapid response, the diamond training and stuff, everything with all the other law enforcement agencies. So it was really good to come in at that ground level and be there through the development of how we handle these situations.
And Heath, you talk about Columbine, and Columbine was kind of the point in our historical reference from a law enforcement perspective because violence has been going on since some of the first ones were recorded back in the late 1800s where there were actually school violence situations. But why in your minds did Columbine address this situation across the United States for law enforcement to take more of a proactive stance?
Well, I think it's pretty easy because if you go back to when you and I were in the police academy, there was no mention of active shooter, rapid response. There's nothing in there. You can go back to all those books. There's nothing in there until after Columbine. Columbine's kind of like the fulcrum point of when we really started seeing this uprise in these. And that's when, law enforcement had to start training to this, develop topics to train. But before that, there's nothing. You can go back to any police academy book before 1999. There's nothing in there about rapid response or active shooter.
And, both of us being on the job at the same time back then, I remember specifically just the parental outrage. And with cable news television becoming into its own, media mainstream at that time, I will never forget watching CNN, and the reporters were watching this unfold live, and the reporters were even asking, why are the cops not going in to the school? And I think a lot of it had to do with the media criticism. And then when they brought the parents on, interviewing the parents that had happened, and they all had the same question. Why was law enforcement just standing by their police cars while this was going on and nobody went in?
Right. And if you think back to our training back then, it was wait. I mean, there was nothing in there about running in and going after the assailant. It was
wait for SWAT.
Wait for backup. You weren't going in there by yourself. And then through the evolution of that, we came up with these 4-man rapid response, and that wasn't working. Law enforcement wasn't stopping but 1.5%, 2% of all these interactions. And it wasn't until about 2014 that we developed this solo engagement where we said, we're better trained. We have better weaponry. Our guys are practicing shooting. They know how to do this. Go by yourself, solo engagement. Right. And I think once solo engagement kicked off, law enforcement started stopping 60, 64, 65% of these because now we're getting inside the building while the person's still in there.
Right. And even though this is a technique that we use today in a method, I mean, we still, even today in 2022 and 2023 and now in 24, we have situations that have arisen across the country that we're still criticized, law enforcement as a whole, as to why certain situations weren't handled, why the cops didn't go in. School shootings have recently happened in an hour or over an hour for police deployment. Is it just because it hasn't caught on across the country, or is it just budgeting, lack of training, and a lot of focus not being given to local police budgets anymore.
I don't think that. When all this stuff kicked off about reform police and police need training, I think we're the best trained profession out there. We train constantly. We're constantly short on shifts because we're training.
Mm-hmm.
It ain't the training. We're the best profession when it comes to training. I think that it's maybe lack of, live training or, more realistic training. The state's doing a good job with their mobile training center and, trying to get these schools involved with it. But I don't think it's training. I think that it's either the buy-in to it or the thought of it's never going to happen here.
Right.
So they're really not bought into it. When they do the training, they do it, but it's not the buy into it when you see these long drawn out. But, these are pretty intense situations.
Yeah, I have to kind of chuckle about that when you say the buy-in, because when my son started in law enforcement, he started his career at CMHA, drove his mother absolutely crazy. And I said, actually, that'll probably be one of the safest places that he can work. His head, as we say in law enforcement, would be on a swivel all the time.
Nonstop.
He's looking for what's going on, joined the SWAT team at CMHA, then transferred over to a local department here in Lorain County. And then now he's working for a suburb up in Detroit. And so when you look at those situations regarding the buy-in, I think a lot of times they'll pick a department because I want to be in law enforcement, but I'll go work in this particular department because I don't expect anything to happen there.
Correct.
And that's dangerous, isn't it?
It is. Yep.
And that same mindset also translates to the individual population when they say, I have an expectation in this particular location that I should be safer at a mall, say in Strongsville, versus when North Randall Mall,
Yep.
used to be open on the east side. And I think a lot of times people mistakenly put a sense of security in a place, depending on where its location is, or something may not happen there.
Right.
And then a lot of times too, we find in our profession, do we not, that sometimes those law enforcement agencies aren't as prepared as the other agencies who do have regular issues in their communities.
Yeah. And I think that goes back to it'll never happen here.
Right.
They don't go into the schools. They don't do the walkthrough. They don't see it. They don't have the training in the actual school. They do it, in a building.
Mm-hmm.
I think that put them in the mindset, do the training, the inoculation training where they're hearing the bang box going off. They see the smoke. When we do that, the shooting at the beginning of the training versus the shooting at the end of the training is night and day. The miss ratio is so high at the beginning of the day when we drive that heart rate up. Mm-hmm. And by the time we teach them how to get the heart rate down, and then we start training that second half after lunch, and all of a sudden they're hitting the targets, is it really this easy to fix this problem?
Now, mindset, you made a great segue into that right now. When we talk about mindset and talk about we're trained for this on a regular basis, or we should be. You just mentioned moments ago, we're probably the best trained profession that's out there. Let's talk about the public that's not involved in law enforcement. And when you talk about mindset, I want you to talk about that in regards to anybody watching or listening to this as to what they should be prepared for in case something happens out there. And when you talk about heart rate, beginning of these training scenarios for law enforcement, and our shooting is not that good at the beginning, but at the end, our shooting is much better. Why don't you, if I recall from what you've told me before, there's a little bit of physiological and psychological issues that go on with the human body when something like this happens. Can you explain to everybody listening what that process is?
Right. And so the presence of gunfire, they've already tested and shown that the heart rate's going to go up over 200 beats a minute. At 200 beats a minute, you lose your dexterity in your fingers. You can't control, small muscle movements, and your vision is messed up. We've seen that in the training. So I think that anybody walking around, if they don't have this in their mindset, they're in that condition white, just that la land, mm-hmm. and they're walking around and they're not paying attention. You got to up your game. You got to walk in. Where's the exits at in this place? If I had to run, where am I going to run? If you start doing that stuff, it just puts you that far ahead, and you're downloading a program into the brain to where if all of a sudden something does happen, you already have a program in the head that you're going to go and react to.
Okay. Now you say walk in. This could be anywhere, just walking into the bar, walking into a restaurant, walking into a department store, wherever you're walking
theater.
into.
Yep.
Okay, so when you say where the exits are and all that, you say you're loading this program, making this plan. What do you mean by that when you walk in?
Just a quick, size up. You walk in, just take a quick second, look around. Where's the exits at? The shooting down at the Pulse nightclub.
Mm-hmm.
They're in a bar. It's a dance bar. The center of the bar is where all the kids were in there dancing. When that guy went in there and started shooting, when we had to watch the debrief on that, the video, a line of kids is running, and they followed the first kid. Instead of stepping to the left and hitting a glass panic push bar to go outside, he ran into the bathroom.
Mm-hmm.
And 20 some kids went into that bathroom and got executed in there. They followed like cattle because they were there to dance and have a good time. Not one of them probably looked around and said, okay, if I had to get out of this place, how am I getting out of here?
Exactly.
And that 2-second look around just gives you that far ahead of the game plan.
And we don't do that generally walking around because, again, we think that we're this sense of safety that you talked about initially.
Right.
What is it that we're looking for? And we don't enter these places, thinking that a bad thing can happen. And, world events that are going on now, especially over in the Middle East, and we've got the state of Jerusalem, which is under attack by, some terrorist organizations that are neighboring, either political entities or non-political entities. We have been warned that threat could be coming to the United States, even though we have our own domestic threats, that take place, people that are unstable that cause these issues. But would you say now, probably more than ever in all the 30 plus years that you've been doing this job, we need to be more aware of what's going on?
Oh, absolutely. The church thing's got to be huge right
yes.
now. And, since about 2003, we really started doing the school safety training and working with the schools. I would say probably around 2007, 2008, we started with the place of worships.
Mm-hmm.
And like right now, I would say that it is very amped up.
Okay. So you talked about Pulse. You're going into a nightclub. You're expecting the dance. What safer place could you think of than going into church on Sunday?
Absolutely.
And going there to the worship and having that type of environment being taken advantage of. So again, put us into that mindset of walking into the church. And even though we're there for a Sunday service, what should we be looking for? And it's the same church you probably go to almost every Sunday, but how should anybody listening to this look at going into church next Sunday?
Well, and it's the same thing. It's you walk in, where are you sitting? You know, people walk in and they're in that, like I say, that condition white where I'm in church. It's the safest place. I'm going to sit here every Sunday.
Mrs. Jones has that seat.
That's her seat. Right. Yep. Don't bump her out of that. I go in there. I sit in the far corner, or I can see the doors. I can see the exits, and it's just the way it is. You have to put yourself in that mindset. You don't have to be openly, crazy about it, but you just have to be ahead of it, the game on it.
Okay. So say something happens in a service like this, you're in the church, last place you would expect that anything like this would happen. You talked about that physiological response, that when gunshots go off, that our heart rate can go up to 200 beats a minute. We start losing fine motor control function. We start losing our full periphery of everything that we can see. And a lot of times people call that tunnel vision because the heart rate goes up so high, your eyes actually become focused narrower, creating that tunnel vision is what they talk about. What do we need to be aware of when those shots are fired and we don't control our heart rate yet as our body is reacting to this, but how can we take control of that?
Well, what we teach the officers is the combat tactical breathing. We go into this breathing cycle, 4 seconds in, hold for 4 seconds, exhale for 4 seconds, hold empty for 4 seconds, and try to repeat it 3 times. You do that, it's going to drive the heart rate down to around 140, 145, which is optimum fighting level.
Something manageable.
Yeah. You can start seeing again. Depth perception comes back. Your hands start working again. You shoot better, everything. But when we hear the presence of gunfire, you should go right into that tactical breathing and start getting your body and your heart under control.
Heath, that almost sounds like one of two things to me. Number one is that being on a rifle range, I think I've had instructors tell me, you take that breath in, you hold it, you let that breath go, you let it go and you hold it and you breathe it back in. And again, where are we taking the shot?
right at the end.
right at the end. So then, as somebody would probably say too, what you just described sounds like what we would do in breathing for yoga. Is that correct?
Yoga. Watch a NBA basketball player on the foul line at the end of the game.
Oh, good point. Yeah.
Watch what he does. He spins the ball. What's he do? He's taking in a deep breath. He holds it. He does. What's he doing? He's driving that heart rate down. The guy that went around teaching these classes with me with the schools and stuff, Jim Larkin, was a naval aviator back in Vietnam. And he said the minute they came out of the clouds and seen the aircraft carrier, which looked like a postage stamp, they tested all their heart rates. And every one of them, the minute they seen that aircraft carrier, their heart went up over 200 beats a minute. And now they got to do all these fine motor skills to land that thing on top of it. And that's where they had to teach them how to get that heart rate down so they could land those aircrafts. I mean, it works.
And if Jim were here, we would make fun of him for his age, just as if he's not here. But I think Jim was flying a Corsair jet back then, right? I mean, and then I think he finally graduated to an F-4 Phantom of what they were flying over there in Vietnam. And fast jets at the time, making sure that they go through the breathing. But was that something he taught you initially that he brought from? I think he was even involved in Top Gun, wasn't he, at Miramar?
He taught the Pacific Fleet.
Okay.
Was his thing. He was the main instructor for the Pacific Fleet after 3 years in Vietnam. But I mean, he's got great stories, but that was his job to teach those Navy aviators on how to control their heart.
Gotcha.
And that's what his main topic was over there.
Okay. So number one, what we're looking at is that somebody comes into the church. All right. Sunday morning, not where you expecting this, or you're going out to your favorite restaurant, not where you're expecting an offensive violence to happen. First rule of thumb is scan the room, is what you're saying, right? Find out where your exits are, how you're going to get to your exit,
right?
Making sure that there's no impediment, stairs, whatever else that you have to get to, or being mindful of it, that it's there on the way out.
Correct.
So scan everywhere. Number two is that, and we want to practice this, do we not, before the incident happens, is that we're going to do that breathing.
Yep.
So again, describe that breathing one more time.
4 seconds in, hold it for 4 seconds, exhale for a full 4 seconds, and hold empty for 4 seconds, and try to repeat it 3 times.
Okay.
And more if you can get it, if you need it. But I mean, even if you just practice that at night, right before you go to bed, you're programming the head to get into that mode of how to do those breathing. And if then when you hear something bad, or even in the middle of the night, the house catches fire, your kid's down at the other end of the hall and they're screaming, and you go to the bedroom door and, there's smoke in there. You got to get down there to grab, little Sally at the end of the hallway. If you haven't programmed in your head where the fire extinguisher is, how am I going to get down the hall? You're going to have to get under control and start that breathing and get your heart rate down, and then take care of business. But that goes back to downloading that program that we were just talking about.
Right. It's
so important. There was a Texas church shooting a couple years ago, and it was one of the news, Dateline or whatever. They were interviewing a lady, and she says, and I can't even believe this in this day and age, she says, I got down on my hands and knees, covered my head, and prepared to die. I mean,
wow.
What program is that? That tells me there was no thought ever that this will ever happen to me. And I
or that they wanted to survive.
Yeah. I just can't imagine somebody in this day and age that would not have, like, I'm going to jump up and claw their eyes out. You're not going to get my kids. But She literally said, I got down on my hands and knees and covered my head and prepared to die. As the guy walked down through the pews shooting, that was her battle plan. And it's like that. I just don't understand how we're into that with this many school shootings, church shootings, malls, everything. That was her plan.
Heath, you bring up another good point, because we talked about preparing. Step one, walking in, looking, seeing where your exits are and how you're going to get to your exit. Number two is, if we start feeling that we're feeling over anxious. And probably a lot of people would recognize this. You have that shortness of breath. You've got the little bit of tightening in the chest. Doesn't mean you're having a heart attack. Just means that the anxiety level has reached a peak. Your heart rate is going up to over 200 beats a minute when we're doing this. So you talk about this plan. We can talk about the breathing, practicing the breathing before we go to bed and all that. We can look and see where our exits are. So I guess the question comes down to is, what do we have to prepare ourselves to start thinking as to what we do in an incident? We know we want to get out. First thing is flight. We want to get out of the situation if we can. And of course, once you're out, call 911, let 911 know what is going on, descriptions of anybody that you can get, what's happening inside. But what if we're stuck?
Well, and I'll tell you that in the training that we did, like I said, we've since 2003, we've done every school in the county.
Mm-hmm.
We did 400 and some churches, businesses, construction companies. I mean, if they called, we went. We did the live inoculation training with the sound and smoke and stuff like that. And I will tell you, run, hide, fight, easy thing to remember.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we don't have to get creative here. Run, hide, fight. Run works. Get the heck out, run. But I will say that barricading in, dumping into a room and securing the door, every time I would tell these role players that was my bad guy, check the doors. If it's unlocked, go in either like airsoft guns, go in and shoot the people. Try to get in these rooms. And I would set video cameras up and I would tell the bad guy, go in there, start shooting, find open doors, walk inside and start shooting. I would tell the teachers or whoever, run or barricade your door.
Mm-hmm.
Don't let anybody in there and barricade those doors. I would leave the bad guy role player with this thought. I would tell them right before they walked in, you go in, you start shooting, you find as many people as you can and you try to get them. But I'm going to tell you this, in 1 minute, I'm sending one guy with a simunition gun that shoots 500 feet per second, a little paint cartridge. At 1:15, I'm sending the second guy. And at 1:30, I'm sending the third guy. So understand, you have a minute and then we're coming to get you. When I leave that guy with that, he would head down the hallways shooting. And on video, you would see him running past doors and mad dashing, trying to find just teachers in a door that's open, in a hallway. They don't even look at those locked doors. They might jiggle them, but they don't spend the time to mess with them because they know law enforcement's coming. Now, when I wouldn't tell the bad guy that, they would spend more time goofing around and stuff like that. But when I started telling them, get ready, because we're coming.
Right.
It amped it up in their head. And their battle plan changed in their head. I got to go as fast as I can and find as many as I can. And I got to find them open walking in the hallway.
Right.
Because we would put students in the hallway. We would put teachers wandering the hall. And the minute that they would do a lockdown drill, they knew it was, like the old game, find a seat when the music stops.
Exactly.
You had to find somewhere to get into and lock that door. When we started doing that, the barricade became like a very big thing for me. I wasn't big on it at first. I was like, run, just run. But then I started seeing how these bad guys acted. And it's like, lock them down and lock those doors, barricade your, if you're in a restaurant and somebody walks in, but what do we have? The Cracker Barrel. That guy starts shooting. If you're in the front area of Cracker Barrel eating, there's probably one fire exit. But if you ran into the kitchen, there's a door off the back of the kitchen.
Right.
Or there's a room to lock yourself into or whatever. You're creating that distance and you're creating that gap, and you're not the cattle herd trying to go out the one single door.
Gotcha. You know what? That's a great point to talk about. We're trying to prepare for a mindset ourselves, looking at a particular location when we go in there, how we're going to prepare for a potential confrontation that's coming on. But also, the audience understanding what the shooter's mindset is, too, is a good thing to know. We're going to come back to that topic after we take this quick break, and we're going to continue this conversation. You're with the committee to elect Hall for Sheriff. We're talking about school and workplace safety tonight, and we have former Lorain County SWAT Commander Heath Tester with us, and we will be right back after this message. Nothing beats a good old-fashioned pancake breakfast. This February 4th, join us in Camden Township as we host an all-you-can-eat breakfast featuring pancakes, sausage, and hash browns. Breakfast is served from 8 a.m. until 1 p.m. at the Camden Township Rental Hall on State Route 303 and State Route 511. Tickets are only $15 for adults and $5 for children under 12, and tickets can be purchased at hallforsheriff.com at the door during the day of the event, or from any Hall for Sheriff campaign committee member.
Paid for by the Committee to Elect Hall for Sheriff.
I'm Jack Hall, and I want to invite you to Java with Jack, a fellowship program which brings community members together to discuss how we can all make neighborhoods safer in Lorain County. I'll be on hand to listen to your concerns and to discuss my vision on improving neighborhood safety, creating fiscal accountability, and building trust between our communities and law enforcement. So come and join us on Saturday, February 17th from 9 o'clock in the morning until 11 at Bistro 83 on Mills Road and State Route 83 in North Ridgeville. Come and help us seek solutions instead of just endorsements. We'll see you there. Paid for by the Committee to Elect Hall for Sheriff. All right, thank you and welcome back. And again, we're with retired SWAT Commander Heath Tester, who is with the Lorain County Sheriff's Office SWAT team. We've been talking about mental preparedness for armed encounters and confrontations, especially in public places. A lot of times this has to do with schools, churches, when we discuss restaurants, bars, places like that we frequent. So up to this point to the break, we had talked about our own mental mindset and being prepared, looking at locations that we go into, looking for exit paths and routes and how we want to run, hide, and fight. How are we going to run and get out of the place in the first place? 2, we talked about our own breathing. What happens when our heart rate jumps up and that gunshot goes off and we go up to 200 beats a minute on our heart rate, start losing fine tactile motor skills, control of our hands, getting tunnel vision. And then before we went to the break, Heath, you were talking about the mindset of the shooter, what they're looking to do. And a lot of times is that they know if law enforcement is coming and they're there to eliminate them as the threat. Then we get into a situation is that their mindset, if I understood you right before the break, how many people can I kill before law enforcement arrives on scene?
Yeah, the bad guys that we set up to go in there to do it, our role players. That's the role we gave them. Go in and find as many as you can, shoot them with those little airsoft guns, dart guns, whatever we used. Get as many as you can, search for them, and go.
But you tell them that because this is based on research of what actual shooters do in situations.
You know, the bad part about this is, and we'll get back to that in a second. These bad guys go in there with a game plan. Every one of these, it's in the high 80s that have a pre-scripted. They've checked out the location. They've done a rehearsal walkthrough. In their mind, they have a plan in their head already downloaded.
Right.
They know what they want to do. So when they go in there, whether it be the lunchroom, whether it be wherever they're going to do this shooting, they have it scoped out, planned out, everything. So they're already ahead of the curve. And that goes back to like when I tell these role players, this is what I want. You're going in. I want 3 or 4 shots with the blank gun, which, really puts a high intensity on there. We're operating the bang box, which is super loud. And I want you to find as many people in this hallway or wherever at open doors, go find them. So I'm kind of giving them their plan. But the minute I put that little seed in their head that we're coming in with a way more higher powered paintball gun than you got, and we're going to shoot you with it. All of a sudden, when we video them and watch them go through, that's how you learn. And I would put my SWAT guys as the bad guy and come back. And when we debrief them, they're like, what we learned from them is so valuable because what their mindset was, they'll start telling you, oh my God, what didn't work. So I took off and did this and I did that. And I'm like, I told you to do this. And they're like, yeah, I forgot. Right. Because there was an audible distraction or there was something that took them off their game plan and they can't get back onto what their game plan was. And we end up getting them quick.
You brought up a really good thing just now, audible distraction.
Absolutely.
When we talk about run, hide, and fight, and we've gotten out of the location, but we couldn't, now we're hiding. Biggest thing is you're telling everybody, barricade, lock a door, prevent them from coming in, put some type of obstruction between yourself and the shooter or the person who's committing the violent act. Because again, if they've scoped this out, and especially somebody that knows the building, they may have even pulled a fire alarm sometime just to see What is the police response to a 911 call? What is the alarm response by the police? Because they're probably planning how much time do I have before the first car could potentially be here. And also knowing we're not waiting for the SWAT team arrive. The first cop's coming in.
Yeah.
So we're coming in. So they know that they have so much time. So therefore, like you said, even though that these are trained law enforcement professionals who are engaging in this scenario, they themselves are acting in the same way that a frantic shooter, because I'm sure their blood pressure, their heartbeats per minute are going up as well during this situation. So they're forgetting, because their whole sole mission now is to how many people can I get in the shortest period of time. So then we covered the running, we've covered the hiding. Now we're kind of like into a fighting situation. And you talked about that audible distraction. How important is that? Because remember, we talked about heartbeat going up, our mind is narrowing in what we're doing. We're focused on a sole mission now of what we want to do. You talked about that audible distraction, and as having a psychology background myself, I know that sometimes there are certain things that can break a cycle of concentration. And is that what that audible distraction is doing?
And I believe it was the Chardon shooting that took place in the lunchroom.
I'm glad you went there. Yeah.
That's what stopped that kid. And it's not
And
what
explain
stopped
that,
him.
yeah.
It's not what stopped him. It took him off his when they read his manifesto or whatever he wrote down for that. It was to get specific kids, and then he was going to get as many as he could before he was taken down or getting out of that lunchroom. I believe it was the gym teacher or one of the teachers screamed his name while he was moving through there, and he stopped and turned. And at that point, he exited the building.
Broke up his entire game plan.
It broke up his game plan. That audible distraction stopped exactly what he had going on, and he couldn't get back into it because probably his heart rate was up over that threshold. He had his plan. He was working through his, what he downloaded in his head. But when that audible distraction went, all of a sudden the heart rate probably kicked in and he couldn't get back into that game plan, and he had to run out.
Right, because he himself had to run, hide,
yeah,
or fight
exactly.
at that point in time.
It's that, but there's been so many of these where that audible distraction has changed the course because of that.
Now, we've done a lot of training with school students, workplace violence, and all this. We will have like the little soft Nerf toys or whatever else, and we try to train everybody. You have a coffee cup, you have whatever it is, get into your hand and throw and try to distract them. But we teach them throwing the object at them. Then we also try to teach them to yell while they're throwing that. We've talked about the audible distraction. Now let's talk about the physical distraction that comes at them.
Let me tell you this story. And it talks about the downloading of the program in the head. Like walking into the movie theater, anywhere, it's so important to have that program downloaded in your head. It only takes 5 seconds to load it in there, but at least you're thinking about it. We did a training, I believe it was out at Midview. Again, I had a role player, and I told him, I said, you're going to move through there. I want you to move around and shoot as many as you can. If you find an unlocked door, I want you to enter it. Well, I pre-staged a unlocked door, and I put about 20 teachers in there, and I gave them these Nerf balls. My thought was I wanted to show them that he could not hit them with the dart gun or whatever he had if they're throwing objects at him.
Right.
So I'm in the room. I tell these people, he's coming in. I want you to throw the balls right at his face. They're little Nerf balls. Throw them at his face. I had a ton of them. I want to show you that he's not going to be able to shoot you when items are thrown at his face. This kid comes through the door. He goes to shoot. On video, you watch this lady drop 2 balls and grab the 35-gallon trash can and smacked him in the face. She jumps on top and starts crushing him with the can. And all the teachers kind of formed a semicircle and they're throwing their balls at the guy. I had to jump in and break her up from smashing him with the trash can.
The exercise, right?
So when I asked her, I said, well, we did the debrief, and I said, why the trash can? And she's like, I don't know. And I go, no. You had 2 Nerf balls. Why did you drop the balls and pick up a trash can? And she's like, I don't know. And I said, no, there's got to be a reason. She said, listen, I work in the cafeteria. I have nowhere to go. So when we do these dang lockdown drills, I just grabbed my trash can. I go, stop right there. You do what? She goes, I grab my trash can. And I go, your trash can. And she goes, and I get in this little cubby and I pull the trash can in front of me. And I always said that if they ever came back there, I'm going to pick the trash can up, I'm going to beat the hell out of them, and I'm going to grab a knife or something. Tell you how powerful the brain is. What did she do? That ball made no sense to her.
Right.
When that kid came through the door, she dropped the things that made no sense and went right to her trash can and beat the heck out of the kid.
She went to her program that
yeah,
she had downloaded
exactly.
in her
That's
head.
how strong that is.
Wow, that's absolutely amazing.
Yeah, that video, we were like, oh my God, that's like gold right there. But I mean, that's how crazy that was.
Right. Yeah, it absolutely sounds
It wasn't good
nuts.
for the kid that got whacked by it, but yeah.
No, I bet not.
Right.
So, but yeah, so she had that planned out. So one, she was running.
Yep.
Couldn't get out, so she hides. Her plan was she was going to pull the garbage can there. If she was discovered, she already knew her fighting would be. She was grabbing that garbage can and she was going to use it against whoever was going to try to cause her harm. So yeah, she went through this mentally, step by step in her head. She knew exactly what it was that she was going to do. The scenario probably got a little out of hand. You had to index stop the scenario and, bring everything back to reality.
Right. We did one in a library. A library brought us in to do the same thing for them. And I'm trying to think, like, how can I make an active shooter situation for a library? Right. So what I did was, my role play was that the husband and wife got in a fight out in the street, and she runs inside the building during the little kid reading day where they're doing a little sit around reading, and they got the adults upstairs in the library. And I said, this lady's going to come through screaming. And a minute later, the husband's coming in. He's going to let 2 rounds off with this blank gun. And he's going to, and I told him, you go and you run and you get either to the stairwell and you get up on the 2nd story, and that's where you're going to confront her. He comes blasting through. Now, this is a SWAT guy. I have him blasting through there. And I told him, everybody else is going to like barricade down and stuff like that. I want you to make your way in there, shoot a couple rounds and get up the steps and get that, get the lady. He comes in there, he lights 3 rounds off, and this kid, a guy, gets scared and grabs a book off the shelf and chucked it at him and hit my bad guy. He stopped and he's turning and twisting and turning and twisting. And I'm like, up the steps. I had to yell to him. And then he took off up the steps. When we went back and debriefed on that, he goes, I couldn't remember what the heck I was supposed to do. He goes, he wasn't supposed to throw a book at me. And I go, yeah, but he didn't know what to do either. And he hit you in the head with the book. But that's how far it took him off his game plan. He couldn't remember what he was supposed to do to go up there and get the girl.
Because in his program,
yep,
he's the one in charge. He's the one that's going to cause the violence. He's the one that's going to cause the harm.
Yes.
And when somebody causes it against him, the program's broken.
It's done
at that time.
So if somebody just yelled, if somebody come running into a church and they start shooting and somebody yells, get him, and 4 or 5 guys all of a sudden jump on him or grab his leg and take him down or start chucking books at him, it's gonna stop that.
Right. And a lot of times people will say, oh, it's these video games that the kids watch and all that too. But you and I have been involved in a lot of firearm training, advanced firearm training. And I got to tell you right now, even though when we get into these high stress situations of, especially when it gets into competitive drills with somebody else, that you're in the school with, you come up, we're timed to go through these drills and to make sure that our shots are right on where they need to be. When you're concentrating on that and you're using all the tactical training that you have to make sure that your sight picture is in alignment, you're coming up there and you're doing this as quick as possible to get those shots on target. Somebody breaking your program, because our program in that range training is that we've gone through all this. It's culminated now. We're in a timed exercise to be able to get this done and be able to get our shots on target. Now somebody's breaking that program because they're throwing things at us. They're yelling, they're getting in our face. And so being the bad guy shooter in these situations as well, too, I can speak from personal experience. You can't concentrate.
It's hard
on what you're shooting. It's very, very difficult to hit anything. At that
remember we had probably early 2000s where it shot that little Nerf ball back at you.
Yes.
The Fat Simulator or whatever. And it just that little tiny Nerf ball flying at you takes and you turn your head and then you got to come back to the target. Right. Just that little bit of distraction. It's hard to get back on.
Yeah. And then your scores go down, your timing, you can't get all your shots in the amount of time that you have to. And I think if people haven't experienced that, is that throwing something, breaking the cycle, breaking the program, it works.
Yeah.
It absolutely works. Could save your life. And I think that's something that people have to take into consideration. All right. So we're talking about the running, the hiding, and now the fighting in this type of situation, talking about loading a program in and doing this. When we're in more familiar situations, and I want to jump back to this because you brought up a fire taking place in your house and being familiar within your own home where things are. And my wife always has a saying. She goes, well, if things were put back in the drawer where they were supposed to be, then we would know.
Right,
You know, she makes a good point
Yeah.
to that. And can you explain that a little bit? We've talked about unfamiliar situations, and I know sometimes if we go to church every Sunday, that may be a familiar situation. But let's talk about the familiar situations and programming our mind. And it may not have to be a violent situation, but let's talk about the fire in the house of how we prepare, program our mind to be able to deal with these types of stressful situations.
Well, and the thing is, I gotta agree with your wife. I mean, if you know where that fire
Don't
extinguisher's
agree with
at,
her.
no. if you know where that fire extinguisher's at, it should
Right.
stay in the same place. It
Right.
shouldn't move around with day of cleaning, and we move from the garage to the
Right.
the back room. It should be in the same spot. Cell phone. If you got a phone by the bed and you wake up and the house is on fire and it's down on the kitchen counter,
Right.
put things in the same spot, practice it, talk to the kids about, crawling, getting down to this room, or I'm coming down to get you, or how to get out of the house, out of the second story. I remember having this discussion with my kids. I'm like, hey, you got to jump. I said, hang off the window. It's not as far to fall. And, try to hit the table, the lawn table out there. But, just, you got to talk to them about it and take away that mystery, because you don't want them waking up in the middle of the night and there's smoke coming under the door and they don't know what to do and they never talked about it. They're going to do what the lady did in the church, sit down and prepare, and that's not what we want.
And then I'm going to go and jump to cell phone right now, because you brought up a good point. On the side of my bed, that's where it's charged every single time. That's where the phone is going to be. I know where I need to grab it. Yes, I still have a landline right in my house too. That's sitting there. But I think a lot of people don't realize you're in public. You're just going to the restroom and you're like, oh, I'm just walking down the aisle. I'm going, take the phone with you, no?
Yeah.
Because a lot of people don't understand that the last thing you need is not to have a communication device on you, not to have a phone with you when something bad is happening, for 911 calls, or if you're going to be shooting a video of something or whatever else that's going on. If you get up to go somewhere, make sure you have that phone with you.
Yeah, absolutely.
And put that into your program, as well. So when we talk about, our familiar locations, our unfamiliar locations, we talked about running out of there, hiding if we have to, fighting. One of the things that always amazes me that people, even in the scenarios that we run, we tell them to call 911 when they get out of there. And in these scenarios, we would set up, a number, and we knew that the 911 call was coming through there.
Right.
I still cannot believe to this day that we don't put this into our programming to think about this, due to the fact is that in all the scenario training that we've done, I would say probably in the high 90s, people don't remember to call 911. They get out of the situation, they drive away. I know there's a lot of large companies. We did training for this. How do you keep track of your employees if they're doing this? And people just don't think. They're like, it's almost like Forrest Gump. They run and they keep running. And next thing you know, we have an unaccounted for student, unaccounted for employee. Nobody checks in.
Yeah.
Can you talk to the importance about that, of just when do we get back to some form of normalcy? When does that happen? Because is that something that has to be broken in our programming too?
As far as, what he's talking about, like the reunification, like after one of these, or
heading up to that, or simply just take your phone with you and call 911. A lot of times, do you agree with me? A lot of people probably assume, well, everybody's calling 911. If I call 911, it's just going to be another phone call.
I called the Cleveland Clinic the other day just to schedule an appointment, and it says, if this is emergency, hang up and call 911. And I melted down. I'm like, how in 2024 we got to tell somebody to call 911?
That's my point.
But it's amazing that
Yes.
you really do, because people get so scared that they like I'm telling you, when that heart rate goes up, they can't even hit the buttons on the phone. If you watch them try to dial, on a traffic crash or whatever, they're trying to dial 911. They can't even get their fingers to press those buttons.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? So, yeah, I mean, it's just part of the plan that you have to have downloaded in that head. I'm going to dial 911. I'm going to put my phone away. I'm going to do this, whatever. Or you call 911. I'm going to fight,
Exactly.
Talk about it, like have a plan with it.
Right. Okay. Then you bring us to another great point. reunification. And a lot of times people don't understand that are either not involved in the situation or that are involved in the situation, how important it is for reunification.
Oh, it's huge. And this is something that we worked with the schools with is it's just like, it goes back to the buy-in. You know, let's spend 10 minutes. Let's do this drill. Let's check the box. Let's get it over with. The state requires this. Let's do, you know, there's just very little buy-in with the schools. But that I would tell them, this is going to be a nightmare. You're going to lose kids everywhere. They're going to be, you know, running home. You know, you don't know what they're going to do. You got to have a plan in place.
Right.
Elyria, they had a real live active shooter called in. It turned out to be, you know, a hoax, but we responded as if it was a real active shooter. The reunification site, the plan was that the teachers had these traffic vests, and they were going to go to the reunification site, and they were going to form a circle around the students and kind of keep the students in there. While this was live, and we were really at the time thinking it was real, I looked over there and there were kids walking down Middle Avenue. Teachers were all gathered by themselves on the phone over there, you know, checking their social media, and the kids are walking south on Middle Avenue. And it's like, oh God,
all out the window.
Yeah. What are we doing? Game plan over. We would ask the teachers as they're leaving the building, hey, where's your traffic vest? Oh, I don't even know where it's at. I don't have it. I didn't bring it. And it's like, today's game day, guys. This is where we're at. And it was big. I mean, that helped us with training once, you know, thank God it was not real.
Right.
But afterwards we had some serious conversations with this. And then we went back to these schools and said, you guys have to buy in on this. And it's hard.
And we have a friend of the campaign, Justin Mead is his name, and he does the work with the autism awareness training. And I know one of the points that he talked about with the teachers, especially those dealing with the autistic kids, once that child knows that they're supposed to be looking for that teacher, their program is probably more intense than anybody else's. And that teacher better be wearing that vest, because that kid knows in that situation that that's exactly who they are supposed to be looking for. And if we don't drill this, if we don't plan about the reunification, we're going to fall apart there.
Yeah. And I had this conversation with Justin about this, and I think something moving forward is those children should have like a lanyard or something that law enforcement recognizes. So if they are in the hallway and law enforcement's moving through there and they're not responding to commands, hands up, get down, you know what I mean? So we have a way of identifying that there's an issue there, and we can take the appropriate action. I mean, we're in 2024 and we still have not fixed these little problems. And I talked at length with Justin about this, and there's so many little simple steps like that that can help this curve, that we can get ahead of it. And that is one. Definitely.
Exactly. And especially any child with a neurological disorder or developmental disability, we want to make sure that everybody is being reunified with family, with teachers, every child who's supposed to be taken care of, even things from, you know, flooding at a fair to, you know, a situation that we have with an active shooter or active assailants in a school or public building. One thing, I know we jumped to reunification, but I want you to explain from a SWAT perspective, because a lot of times I hear this too. We're getting people out of the building and we're getting them to what we call a recall point, but it's where the reunification is taking place. I always get asked this question all the time. Why are you patting down the students?
Because you don't know who it is.
Exactly.
And I'm going to tell you another thing. We found in that Elyria drill, you can't tell the difference between a student and a teacher.
Oh, true.
We used to have a day when teachers wore a tie or a dress and they looked the part. And now you can't tell them apart. Flip flops, holes in the jeans. You know, it's this softening up, wanting them to fit in and not be authoritarian or whatever the mindset is on this. But here's the problem. How do you identify them as you're removing them from the class? You know, you can't tell them apart.
Right.
What we thought were students were teachers, and what we thought were teachers were students. And it was like, that was a hard part for this.
Yeah.
And, you know, they have a role, play it.
Exactly. And in addition to that too, you know, and part of that process, you know, I think a lot of people get confused. They're like, these kids or even the teachers that are coming out are victims. And why are you guys patting these people down when they're
Yeah.
coming out of there? I get asked a question all the time. So from a police and security SWAT perspective, I mean, I've been through the training, but I think the listeners need to know, if you're going to be involved in an active threat situation, you're exiting and you see law enforcement, don't be surprised if law enforcement asks to pat you down as you're exiting. Why are we doing that?
Right. And what's the alternative? Staying in there? I mean,
Right.
do
But
it.
again, like you said, we may not be able to distinguish between the teacher and the student. We may not be able to distinguish between the shooter who is trying to exit with the
Yeah,
students
exactly.
in order to either use them as cover, or in the chaos of everybody leaving the situation, your assailant may be going out with the victims of that particular situation. So I get asked that a lot of times. So I don't understand why SWAT patting down the kids that are coming out of there. Well, again, we don't know what the age of the shooter is. The shooter could be in the student body. We're trying to figure this out. We just want to make sure that nobody leaves that building with a weapon, and that weapon leaves the confined area of the building that we're trying to control to now going out into the public.
Yeah,
at that point in time.
definitely. And that's something we worked with the training with the schools, is that
Mhm.
this is part of the process.
Right.
Understand it, know it. This is what we're going to do. This is part of the process.
Right. So Heath, in the last couple of minutes that we have here, where do you see all this going over the course of the next couple of years? I mean, we're here putting this program on. We're in a situation. I'm running for Lorain County Sheriff in 2024. We're looking at making communities safer. We want to make sure that we're accountable to everybody and rebuilding that trust with the neighborhood and with all of the communities, and making sure that the schools are safe. We have, I know you and we've talked about putting this program to the schools together. I think I've heard part of the program that you and I were involved with, and probably over 20 years ago, in identifying the schools, the layout of schools. It's kind of the same plan that's being used today, even though that we have new schools and everything else that's been built, but there's not been much of an improvement over the last 2 decades, has there?
No, I mean, you build these new schools and they put a second-story walkway right over top of the cafeteria.
Right.
And it's like, where's all these school shootings been? Or we build the whole thing out of glass in the front. I mean, what are we making them safe? Or are we really paying attention? The biggest thing, the magic bullet to this thing, is that the buy-in, again, is so little. Here's the thing. 90%, it's like 93% of these school shooters have told somebody. They have communicated. If I said you had a 93% chance to win the lottery, everybody would run out and play it.
Exactly.
93% are telling somebody that this happened. And then there's like 80 some percent that, like I said, they've walked through, they've communicated this. The schools have known that the person is troubled and that there's a problem at home, and nothing's done. The U.S. military figured out this catchphrase, left of bang. Here's the explosion and our soldiers are dying. Why can't we figure out where they're manufacturing the bombs or where they're getting the det wires and stuff? The military figured this out to make our soldiers safe. How, since Columbine 1999, have we not figured out what the left of bang is?
Yeah.
So something I think that needs worked with is these intervention programs with the schools. And I think that what we do is we develop these teams that is in the school. They have a troubled kid. They start going down the checklist, single family home, access to guns, violence in the home, whatever the case is. We put these checklists together, and if all of a sudden the kid is making statements that are out of normal, they can run it through this system and say, whoa, let's get the parents involved. Let's bring this in. Let's get the clergy involved. If we can just get left of this and start recognizing who these kids are that are troubled, and say, okay, he's communicated to somebody. He's made it clear that he, comments in school that he's going to shoot the place up or whatever, but the schools don't do anything with it. They hear this stuff, they know it. And then when you confront the schools out there, like, wow, we can't do that. We're not allowed to, we're not. It's like, wait a minute.
Somebody call it profiling.
Yes. What is the alternative here? But if the thing is, it doesn't even have to be profile. It's a check sheet. And if they match that criteria, let's get involved. Let's knock on a door. Let's talk to somebody. Let's sit down with the kid. They call it the beta revolution. This ain't the over aggressive kid. These are the
Right.
docile guys that are coming in here and shooting us up. Let's recognize it.
Yes.
Let's find these kids. Let's bring them in and just have a conversation with them. That might be the audible distraction that turns this thing sideways.
Very good. Yeah.
Get them involved in sports, in coaching. I would try to get these kids that you could tell that were just pushed out, figure out a way to bring them into the middle of the fray of this thing. And it goes away. The bullying goes away, the picking on them, the needling them. Just make them part of these coaches should be taking this serious. The teachers in class, you hear a kid that's getting bullied or picked on because his clothes don't match or whatever. How hard is it to figure out a way to bring that kid into the fold and make him part of the class?
Exactly.
Do group projects, whatever it is. But if we can just get to the left side of this and start working with these schools, with our, your SROs and stuff like that, DARE officers, if you can just start figuring out who these kids are and start working with them, I think you can cut this off.
And we work it together
Yeah.
and break the program.
Absolutely.
Together. Well, probably a topic for another day that we'll be discussing that. But again, Heath, thanks for doing with this tonight. Hope everybody got something out of this. And if you have any questions regarding this is being put out on our social media channels. Feel free to ask us any questions or shoot an email to info@hallforsheriff.com, and we'll get a response out to you. Thanks again, Heath, for coming on the show, and we'll see you all in the next program. Thank you for watching our podcast for preparing for violence in public places. If your church, business, or community organization would like to have an assessment or training done at your location, feel free to contact us at the Committee to Elect Hall for Sheriff by calling 216-503-2359 or reaching us via email at info@hallforsheriff.com. We look forward to being of service to you.
Paid for by the Committee to Elect Hall for Sheriff.